John Malone, the Darth Vader of cable, cable cowboy. This man has had huge influence in many businesses such as cable, telecoms, media, and still does today in companies like Warner Bros. Or Charter. Today I'm going to be talking about his history, how he was able to bring back TCI from near bankruptcy, and how his strategy is reflected in many of his companies today. So TCI, Telecommunications Inc., went public in 1970. Back then it was the 10th largest cable company. John Malone took over in 1972, and by 1982, Malone had made TCI the largest cable company in the US. However, this success was not linear at all. Only 2 years after he took over, the company had almost gone bankrupt. They tried to do a stock offering, but due to the Arab oil embargo in these years, there was practically no liquidity for that. So how was he able to do that? The first one is debt and how he would use debt. So instead of trying to pay down debt and convince creditors that they were going to reduce leverage, what he did is he actually borrowed more. He would borrow from any bank he could and then pay the interest of the other banks. And whatever was left, he would invest at a rate of return higher than the cost of borrowing. And he would basically repeat that as much as he could, and he would go to the banks and promise them that in the future they will have more subscribers, more users, and therefore they will be able to service their debt in the future, which was true. So that is also seen in today's Charter. So Charter being a cable company essentially, we see a long-term debt of about $100 billion. And that is for a company that only generates $50 billion in revenue and about $12 billion in operating income. So the reason you use debt is if you have $100 billion in debt with 5% interest, which is around $5 billion in annual interest payments, you only end up paying taxes on $7 billion as opposed to $12 billion. And if you want to fund new infrastructure, you just take more debt and therefore pay less taxes. The second way he did it was through the way he used depreciation. TCI historically had not paid taxes for more than 20-25 years, similar to what Amazon did, but not exactly the same. So the way he did it is by basically, should I say, lying on depreciation. So this is Charter's depreciation lifetime. So cable, it puts it down as 6 to 22 years, whereas in reality, most cables that you put on the ground can last more than 30, 40, maybe 50 years. So this does not really represent reality. And TCI would actually depreciate even more aggressively, like usually 10 years max, or basically as short as they could. Once that depreciation ran out, they would even sell the asset to someone else and then get the depreciation back again, just by basically selling to someone within the big company or acquire them later. And that is something that is also once again seen in the Warner Bros. Spin-off. So if you most of you guys probably know, Warner Bros. Used to be owned by AT&T. It was spun off in 2022 with a large load of debt, but even more importantly, a large amount of goodwill and intangibles. And then what they did is essentially that they inflated the goodwill and intangibles and then proceeded to write them off over the next 3 years. And here's what we see, like income taxes, their net income was deep in the negative, and they paid practically no taxes for 3 to 4 years, while in reality they actually made $4 or $5 billion a year in free cash flow. So inflate goodwill, depreciate them quickly, and then pay no taxes to 3-4 years. So what John Malone did back in TCI, he actually did almost 500 acquisitions between this period, and he would basically do this constantly. So that's how he was able to never pay any taxes. That plus the debt. So John Malone practically invented EBITDA. Like, given what I've talked about, can you see why? You have a high amount of interest, you inflate depreciation and amortization as much as possible. So your net income actually doesn't mean anything. Net income is just a way that you use it to not pay taxes. But the way you actually value the business is through EBITDA. And for many of John Malone's businesses, that made a lot of sense back in the day. So up next, dividend and buyback policy. So these are pretty much many of the companies that were or are still controlled by John Malone today. TCI, Charter, Warner Bros., Liberty Media, and Liberty Global. None of these companies have ever paid a single dividend in their lifetime. He would rather keep the cash himself to either do a deal, or in some case, he would do buybacks only if the price was low and he basically knew that he was getting a high ROI on his investment in buybacks. Quite similar to what Buffett does, but not exactly the same. And finally, the last one is consolidation. I'm going to be playing a short clip of John Malone here.
So you really try and look risk very hard in terms of how you finance something. Do you have partners in it? The government's always your partner from a tax perspective, so don't forget that you can deduct your failures from your successes. Don't ever get to where you can't. A typical thing for me would be no debt at the parent. Subsidiaries would be levered rationally but substantially, particularly if there's tax or other advantages. And so the parent was always in a position to rescue the subsidiary, but never in jeopardy of a single torpedo, a single bad thing taking it all down. So risk avoidance coming out of the TCI survival, I think, was the number one lesson that I learned. Diversify, never cross-guarantee, never consolidate liabilities unless you're really, really comfortable. Just to get an eighth of a point better deal on your financing, don't go there. Try and isolate your risk.
So no debt at the parent, subsidiaries levered rationally but substantially, never consolidate liabilities, and never cross-guarantee. We're going to take two examples of never consolidating liabilities. So Liberty Global, European telecoms provider. Here's the parent, net cash, zero debt. It owns all of these telecom providers, each one of them being levered quite highly. If one of them has any problems or fails, it does not affect the rest of them. If some problem happens, the parent can choose to save them if they wish so. Liberty Media, this is the main vehicle in which Malone did all his deals. Just a very, very complex architecture. He was a very good architect of businesses. And now to the case of consolidating assets. So similar to TCI, where scale was of massive importance because you then could bundle channels together, Warner Bros. Is the same thing. The more shows you have, the better of an offering HBO is. So here's the history of Malone taking over Discovery in 2005, doing a merger in 2011, merger with Eurosport in 2015, and then finally one in 2018 with Scripps Networks. In 2022, there's the big merger between Warner Media and Discovery, and then now the one coming soon in February, Warner Bros. Acquiring or being acquired by Paramount, basically making as big a company as possible, and then you're going to have your own streaming service, and you hope people are going to want to see it. So yeah, it's all for HBO Max. The second one is Charter. So Liberty Media, so Malone took a stake in Charter in 2013. They do an acquisition, Optimum West, in 2013. They do a merger with Time Warner Cable, 2016, Bright House Networks, and then soon to be Cox Communications. They will make them, Charter, the largest US internet provider. And why do they do that? So here's a funny example. In 2013, Disney basically wanted to increase prices to show the shows on the cable, And then essentially what Charter did is they just removed Walt Disney's channels and accused the company of demanding excessive increase. And basically that then got the leverage back on the side of Charter to make a deal with Disney. So what are the conclusions for today's video? Is use interest and depreciation to grow and pay no tax. Consolidate assets, but never consolidate liabilities. And that John Malone is one of the most influential businessmen in this world, has changed a lot about how people value or run businesses.